When people first hear about this certification, they often imagine it is a trivia contest about Linux facts. But the exam experience is more like a timed reasoning exercise where you prove you can recognize what is happening and choose the safest next move. The point of this first lesson is to make the exam feel familiar before you ever sit down to take it, because stress usually comes from surprises, not from difficulty. If you understand what kinds of thinking the test rewards, you can practice the right way and avoid wasting time on the wrong kind of studying. You do not need to be a working administrator to do well, but you do need to build a calm, repeatable approach to questions, time, and uncertainty. By the end of this episode, you should be able to picture the flow of the exam, understand why it mixes question types, and have a simple plan for pacing that prevents both rushing and freezing. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful way to think about the exam is that it is organized like a map of skills, and that map is split into domains that represent big buckets of knowledge the exam wants you to demonstrate. A domain is not a chapter in a book, and it is not a promise that the exam will give you a neat cluster of questions in that order. It is more like a set of themes that can show up anywhere. Some questions blend domains on purpose, because real Linux work blends concepts, like permissions affecting services or storage choices affecting boot behavior. The exam uses domains so you can prepare broadly, and so the exam writers can balance coverage, but the test itself measures whether you can connect ideas, not whether you can recite a definition from the perfect section. When you study, you want to practice moving between themes smoothly, because the exam may jump from file locations to networking symptoms to user identity logic without warning. If you treat domains as separate islands, the transitions will feel jarring on exam day, and that sensation alone can slow you down. Now, let's talk about what the exam actually asks you to do with those domains, because the most important shift for many beginners is realizing that the questions are often about interpretation, not just memorization. Interpretation means you read a situation and decide what it implies, like noticing that a symptom points to a configuration choice, or recognizing that one option is risky because it affects the entire system. Even when a question looks like a simple fact question, it often hides a decision about what matters most, such as security, stability, or least change. That is why you can know many commands or definitions and still miss questions if you have not practiced deciding what to do first. A beginner-friendly way to train interpretation is to always ask yourself what the question is really testing: recognition of a concept, ability to predict an outcome, or ability to choose the best next step. The exam is designed so that multiple answers can sound plausible, but the best answer is the one that aligns with safe reasoning and correct assumptions. One phrase you will hear with this exam is performance-based questions, often shortened to performance-based questions, PBQs. And even the name can make people nervous because it sounds like you have to be fast at typing or running a lab. The reality is that PBQs are meant to test applied thinking, where you solve a small problem by interacting with a simulated environment or by making choices that represent real tasks. They tend to feel different because they are less like a multiple-choice question and more like a mini-scenario with a goal. The best mindset is to treat a PBQ as a puzzle with constraints, where your job is to identify what the system state is, what the goal state should be, and what minimal changes get you from one to the other. Beginners often panic because they think they must know one exact trick, but most PBQs reward calm logic and careful reading of what is being asked. If you practice breaking tasks into purpose, inputs, and outputs, you will be able to handle PBQs even when they feel unfamiliar. Because PBQs can take more time than typical questions, pacing becomes the silent skill that can decide your score even if you know the material. Pacing is not about rushing, and it is not about reading faster. It is about managing your attention and making sure no single question steals time from the rest of the exam. Imagine you have a budget, and each question is a purchase, but some questions are expensive and some are cheap, and your goal is to get the most points with the budget you have. That means you need to recognize early when a question is going to be costly, and you need a plan for what to do when you hit that moment. A common trap is spending too long trying to force certainty, because your brain wants closure, but exams reward decisions under uncertainty. A better habit is to make a best attempt, choose the best option you can justify, and move on before you overpay with time. When you practice, you should include timed sets so your brain learns what a normal pace feels like. Multiple choice and multiple response questions also have their own pacing patterns, and understanding those patterns helps you avoid losing time in subtle ways. With standard multiple choice, the trap is rereading the question too many times because one word changes the meaning, such as best, first, most likely, or least. The fix is to train yourself to identify the decision word and restate the ask in your own mind. Like, this is asking for the safest first action, not the final fix. With multiple response questions, the trap is treating them like a guessing game and selecting too many options, hoping to cover your bases. The fix is to treat each option like a true or false statement and decide whether it must be correct based on the scenario and the boundaries of Linux behavior. You want to be especially careful with answers that are technically possible but not appropriate, because exams often include options that could work in some world but are wrong in the world described by the question. The skill you are building is disciplined selection, not creative brainstorming. Another big part of being tested is reading for constraints, because the exam is full of small details that quietly tell you what kind of answer is expected. Constraints can be obvious, like being told you have limited access, or subtle, like a hint that the system should remain available, which implies you should avoid disruptive changes. Sometimes the question implies you must preserve security, which rules out options that weaken protections even if they solve the immediate problem. Other times the constraint is that you want the simplest change, which favors adjusting a configuration rather than redesigning a system. Beginners often miss constraints because they focus on the technical nouns, like the name of a file or service, and skip over the verbs and adjectives that explain what matters. A practical mental habit is to separate the story from the ask. First, identify what is happening, then identify what the question wants you to accomplish, and then identify what you are not allowed to break while doing it. That habit makes questions feel slower at first, but it prevents expensive mistakes and saves time overall. It also helps to understand how wrong answers are designed, because that reveals what the exam is trying to detect about your thinking. Many wrong answers are not random. They are built to match common misconceptions, like confusing a concept with a similar-sounding one, or choosing a step that is correct but in the wrong order. Some wrong answers are overly powerful actions that would solve the problem, but are inappropriate because they create risk, like making a broad change when a narrow one would do. Other wrong answers are attractive because they use familiar words, which can trick you into responding based on recognition rather than reasoning. You can protect yourself by asking, what could go wrong if I pick this? And does this answer match the constraint that the question implied? You are essentially doing threat modeling, but for exam choices, where the threat is losing points due to misreading intent. When you practice, do not just note what was right. Note why the wrong ones were tempting, because that is how you rewire your instincts. Let's talk about the actual test-taking flow, because pacing is not just about minutes per question. It is also about when to invest effort and when to defer. Many people find it useful to do a first pass where they answer the questions that feel straightforward and mark the ones that are time-heavy or confusing, especially the ones that involve long reading or multi-step reasoning. The goal of the first pass is to build momentum and secure points while your mind is fresh, rather than getting stuck early and feeling behind. Then you do a second pass where you return to the marked items with the comfort of knowing you have already handled the easier points. This approach reduces anxiety because you stop experiencing every hard question as a threat to the entire exam. It also creates a natural time boundary because you can decide, if I cannot make progress after a short focused attempt, I will move on and come back. The key is to keep your decision-making steady instead of treating each question like it deserves unlimited attention. PBQs fit into this flow in a special way because they can be both high value and time-consuming, and different people handle them best at different times. Some test takers prefer to start with PBQs while they are fresh because they feel like puzzles and can build confidence, while others prefer to skip them initially to avoid a time sink and return later with a clearer view of remaining time. The important part is not which strategy you pick, but that you pick one on purpose and stick with it, because indecision burns time. If you choose to defer PBQs, you are not avoiding them. You are simply scheduling them for when you can afford the focus. If you choose to do them early, you still need a time boundary, so one PBQ does not quietly consume the time meant for many standard questions. A calm exam plan treats PBQs as planned challenges, not surprises that hijack the session. When you practice, include at least occasional longer items so you learn how to keep your breathing and your focus stable. Another thing the exam tests indirectly is your ability to reason from symptoms to categories, even when you do not remember a specific detail. For beginners, the fear is often, what if I forget the exact term? Or what if I cannot recall the one fact the question wants? The better reality is that many questions can be answered by identifying the category of problem and then eliminating answers that do not belong to that category. If the question is about boot behavior, certain kinds of changes make sense and others do not, even if you cannot name every component. If the question is about permissions, answers that talk about network routing are likely distractors, and you can narrow down your options quickly. This is one reason domains matter as a mental map, because they help you label what kind of thinking you are doing. You are training your brain to recognize patterns, like spotting that a symptom points to storage mounting rather than user authentication. Pattern recognition is not magic. It is what happens when you repeatedly connect concepts to the kinds of problems they explain. You also want to prepare for the mental fatigue aspect, because the exam is not only testing knowledge, it is testing sustained attention under time pressure. Early in the exam, you feel sharp, and later, you might start making small reading mistakes, like skipping a word or mixing up two similar options. That is normal, and the solution is to build small habits that keep you grounded, such as pausing for 1 second to restate the ask before committing to an answer. This does not slow you down. It prevents you from wasting time later second-guessing or realizing you misread something. Another helpful habit is to notice when your mind starts racing, because that usually means you are trying to solve too much at once. When that happens, return to the simplest frame. What is the problem? What is the goal? What is the least risky move that satisfies the goal? If you keep returning to that frame, you can maintain steady performance even when you feel tired. Finally, it is worth setting expectations about what strong preparation looks like for this exam, because it is easy to study in a way that feels productive but does not match the test. Strong preparation is not memorizing every possible fact. It is becoming comfortable with how Linux concepts fit together and how to make decisions when you only have partial information. That means practicing questions in a way that forces you to explain your reasoning, even if only in your head, because the exam rewards reasoning more than recall. It also means practicing pacing, because speed without accuracy is not helpful, and accuracy without speed can still fail under time limits. When you get a question wrong in practice, the most valuable follow-up is identifying whether you missed a concept, misread a constraint, or made an overly aggressive choice. Those are 3 different problems, and each has a different fix, which is why reflection is part of learning. The more you train the decision-making process, the more the exam starts to feel like something you can navigate rather than something that happens to you. At this point, you should be able to visualize the Linux Plus exam as a blend of domain themes, decision-focused questions, and a pacing challenge that you can manage with a deliberate plan. The domains give you a preparation map, but the exam measures your ability to connect ideas and choose the best action under constraints. PBQs are not meant to punish you, but to confirm you can apply concepts in a practical way, and they become much less intimidating when you treat them as goal-driven puzzles with time boundaries. Pacing is the skill that keeps you from donating time to a single stubborn question, and it is trainable through timed practice and a 2-pass mindset that protects your momentum. Most importantly, the exam rewards calm interpretation, careful reading, and safe reasoning, which means you can perform well even when you do not feel perfectly certain. If you carry that mindset forward, every future topic you learn will plug into a test-taking approach that is stable and repeatable, and that stability is what turns study time into score improvements.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.